Let's talk now to Jeffrey Feltman, former US ambassador to Lebanon. Ambassador, great to have you on this show. First of all, your reaction to the announcement just now that this is now going to be presented to the Israeli cabinet and I assume approved.
Well, I think it's welcome news. It's welcome news for the Lebanese who have been dealing with the military escalation that often precedes a ceasefire deal. We saw this in the 2006 war, that Israel greatly escalated before agreeing to the ceasefire in August of 2006. And so I think that we see that again now. And if it's implemented as reported, it will be welcome news for the Israelis who've been displaced since northern Israel for a year now. But of course, the trick is the implementation. We had a very, very good plan in 2006 that ended the 2006 war between Hezbollah and Israel. Very strong language from the UN Security Council resolution, but there was a failure to implement, with both sides taking lessons from that failure to implement. So the real question is, assuming the Israeli cabinet approves the ceasefire, I don't think Netanyahu would have made the statement he did if he thought there was any question about that. Then how does one really make sure that implementation works?
Well, one thing we know, I think, is that the Israelis are particularly offended by the involvement of the French in this process for reasons that go back to French politics and Israeli politics. But in the past, the problem has been relatively small UN force trying to police this area, just swept aside by the Israelis when they moved in. Do you think this will require a bigger United Nations force in Lebanon if it goes ahead?
Well, the Lebanese, the peacekeeping forces in Lebanon now is not up to its fully authorized levels. There's about 10,000 troops now. The authorized level is 15,000. That was the number that was set after that 2006 war. So one step should be that the UN deploys people up to that 15,000 limit that the Security Council gave. But the other part of this is for the Lebanese armed forces to deploy in the south, as they promised to do back in 2006, with an equal number of 15,000, so that you basically have filled the space with UN and Lebanese armed forces. I don't believe either would go directly against Hezbollah, but just the presence of that size of a force would make it much, much harder for Hezbollah to resume the freedom of movement they had before.
Well, that's very interesting. I wanted to ask you, Ambassador, but in a sense, this is not a peace deal with Hezbollah because things are too bleak between the Israelis and Hezbollah for that to be plausible at the moment. The Israelis clearly want to destroy Hezbollah, so it is at best a pause. And I suppose the question is whether the Lebanese government is going to look at this and say, well, it buys us a little time, but it doesn't really solve anything.
Well, you could say that the 2006 resolution that I mentioned earlier, 1701 from the Security Council, was also a pause. It was an 18-year pause, but it was also a pause. I mean, there's no question but that the Israelis have seriously degraded the military capacity of Hezbollah. But that's not the same as destroying Hezbollah. It's not the same as eliminating Hezbollah, which is not only a military organization, it's also a political and social organization.
Of course,
and I suspect that Hezbollah presumably has agreed to this via its intermediaries. There was no negotiations directly with Hezbollah from the United States part, because they recognize how seriously they've been degraded and their leadership decimated.
Ambassador Feltman, can I ask you not to go away at all, because I'd like just to play out to you and to people listening some words from Prime Minister Netanyahu, who he has been talking in just the last few minutes.
Tonight, I will bring before the cabinet a plan for a ceasefire in Lebanon. The duration of the ceasefire depends on what happens in Lebanon. We have an understanding with the United States. We are maintaining our full liberty to take military operations. If Hezbollah tries to attack us, if it arms itself, if it rebuilds infrastructure next to the borders, we will attack them. If they launch missiles, if they dig tunnels, we will attack.
So this feels to me, Ambassador, a bit as if Israel is saying, this is a ceasefire, but our finger is still on the trigger.
I think that's correct. And what the Israelis are doing is they are drawing the lessons from 2006. There was a very good Security Council resolution that was never implemented. So they're saying in essence now, we go back to that 2006 understandings about what's supposed to happen in an area between that's north of Israel, between Israel and the Litani River, about 20 miles, 30 kilometers north of Israel. That area is supposed to be free of any arms, equipment, military personnel other than the UN and the Lebanese armed forces. But the Israelis are saying, okay, fine, but we need to have a backup plan. And that backup plan is the side letter with the United States that would say, yes, Israel can, in essence, attack anything that they see as posing an imminent danger to them. But what's also interesting in listening to the Prime Minister's words right now is as through an interpreter, it's the first time I've heard them as well, is that he's talking about that area between the Litani River and the Israeli border where Israel reserves the rights to do some kind of attack if they would see a restoration of the infrastructure, which means that he's essentially saying, we know we haven't destroyed Hezbollah. We know that Hezbollah is still going to be a political, military, social force in Lebanon. They just can't operate in that 20-kilometer zone, the 20-mile zone.
And so southern Lebanon, in essence, has to become a demilitarized zone. Of course, we know the Israelis, above all, don't want to fight on too many fronts. Do you have any concerns that this is a preparation for Israel really turning its gaze much more aggressively on Iran?
It's a good question, because I think Iran is at its most vulnerable point right now. The Israelis have succeeded in taking out important air defenses in Iran, and Iran's forward defense was Hezbollah and its other proxy networks. And Hezbollah is again not destroyed, and probably will rebuild in some way. But right now, Hezbollah cannot provide the same type of retaliatory strikes that the Iranians probably anticipated they could. But let's be clear, Hezbollah, and even as of now, has still managed to fire rockets into Israel. That Hezbollah has not been destroyed, even if they have been militarily degraded.
Ambassador, it's been a really important evening, and I'm very grateful to you for joining me on it. Thank you so much.